the last stretch of our exercise today, trying to find the main thrust of our discussions and also to identify actions to take as necessary. We have with us all the moderators, together with Pilar Vera, that has been instrumental in organizing this symposium and in the discussions. And also we have Steve Kramer, remotely. Good morning, Steve. I don't know if it is morning or afternoon or evening, but in any case, welcome to our discussion. I will proceed with the order that we have in the program, with the only exception that we will have Francisco Moreno before Nancy Graham, and then Nancy Graham will be the last speaker. What we try to get from the moderators is their impression of the main venues of discussion, the findings, and then the identification of actions to be taken by Icao in certain cases, but by other organizations as required, because Icao is not the only instrument to be used in this wide topic that we are touching in this symposium. So without further ado, I would start with Michael. Michael Gill, as you know, is the director of the Legal Bureau and moderator of a very interesting session that we had on the insurance companies and the relation with victims and families. Michael, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Victor, and good morning to everybody. Yes, indeed, we had a fascinating panel looking at the issues of insurance and liability, and I wanted to thank all of the speakers that we had both here in the room as well as joining us virtually, because I think we all learned some new areas of expertise. We found out some aspects of the relationship between insurers and airlines that perhaps we weren't aware of before. But we also, I think, learned of some of the challenges that those representing victims and their families are facing in relation to legal proceedings. So I wanted to thank the speakers. I thought it was really a fantastic session, and one of those sessions where you feel you could have carried on discussing all evening, and it really was fascinating. There were, I think, four key areas that came out of the discussion from my perspective, and I wanted to perhaps list them and then discuss them in a bit more detail. The first was around the fact that there is no, despite the fact we have our Montreal Convention 1999, our international treaty, there is no uniformity, there's no certainty of treatment of a victim of an aircraft accident involving international carriage. That's our first challenge. We also heard challenges around the topic of advance payments. That was one of the novelties of MC99, and yet, some 20 years later, we are seeing challenges around that. There was discussion around the level of compensation for death or injury caused by an aircraft accident. And then a somewhat tangential topic, but a really, really important one, we had some discussion around the treatment of surface damage victims, so those victims of an aircraft accident who are not passengers on board the aircraft itself. So firstly, on that issue of certainty and uniformity, what I heard coming out of the discussion was the fact that there really is a patchwork of different possible regimes applying to the claims of a victim of an accident. On the same flight, we heard you could have any number of different sets of international rules applying to the claim of a victim or their family. That's because the treaty regime looks at the state of departure of the flight in question and the state of arrival, and applies the treaty which is common to those two states. So if they've both applied MC99, then that's fine, MC99 applies. But if only one of them has ratified the new convention, well, you may fall back either into the previous Warsaw Convention regime, or you could find yourself in international carriage but not covered by any treaty at all, or you could find yourself covered by the domestic legal system if the passenger's ticket in question relates to a domestic leg of a trip. So all that to say is that you find yourself we find ourselves often in very complex situations where on the same flight, the same accident, you could have different treatment for different victims. Now that's, I think from an airline and an insurer perspective, I heard that creates operational complexity. It just makes it harder to manage the process. But just in terms of natural justice and fairness, that didn't seem right, I think, to any on the panel. And so what we really need to do from that perspective is to try and have MC99 adopted as the single uniform regime. It will bring certainty to the whole process. It will bring fairness. And at the moment, I just checked the figures again, actually overnight. About 85% of international traffic is covered by MC99. So you still have about 15% of carriage going on today that's not covered by the uniform regime. But we heard from Sarah Stewart, I thought was a really telling argument. She estimated that in the last 10 years, only 26% of victims' claims have been covered by MC99. I think I'm quoting her right on that aspect. So there's a bit of a discrepancy there. There's clearly a significant number of claims by victims and their families that are not being covered by the what was meant to be uniform regime of MC99. Now, it seems simple, and yet it's clearly challenging. What we really need to push for then is uniform application, uniform ratification of the convention. At the moment today, we have 137 Icao member states who've ratified MC99, so that still leaves nearly 60 who have not, if my maths are correct. And I just think as an international community, we need to continue to push for that. That needs decisions by individual governments, whether that's through their parliaments, whether it's through executive order, but we just need to continue to explain the benefits of the treaty for victims as well as for the industry at large, and continue to push for ratification of the treaty in as short a time as possible. So that was on that issue of certainty. I'm going to skip to the issue of surface damage because, again, we have a situation here where there have been attempts made to create an international regime on surface damage. There's a Rome Convention from 1952. It was updated in 2009. We heard from Suhei Tan by the Montreal treaties of 2009. Those have not received at all widespread ratifications, fairly low numbers of states, and as a result, claims by victims on the ground are not covered by international treaty in most cases, and certainly not covered by MC99, which only deals with passengers on board the aircraft. So those fall to then be determined by the domestic law, usually of the place where the accident happened. Again, it's just adding to this patchwork of different potential legal regimes, compensatory regimes, which are applying to the same incident, to the same set of facts. So again, I think we need to, within Icao and the member states through the legal committee, look at, again, this issue of surface damage to see if there's anything we can do to bring some uniformity on an international basis, either through the adoption of the current treaties that are on the books or to look into those treaties again. Now, on the issue of advance payments and the level of compensation, which I do think are somewhat linked as issues, what I heard was that in Europe, there's not such a concern because the European regulation has applied standard levels of advance payments, standard time frames for when advance payments have to be made, but that is not the case across the rest of the globe. And so immediate assistance to families, which is one of the hallmarks of MC99, the advance payments provision, which, as I said, was a novelty in that treaty, is not being applied on a uniform basis. And that, of course, is creating not a level playing field, not a sense of fairness across the board. And on the issue of actual compensation itself, we heard that one of the main principles of MC99 was that compensation should be restitutory in nature. That's to say, to try, to the extent possible, to bring families back to at least in a situation equivalent to prior to the accident. Now, there was, I think, consensus across everybody that that is never going to happen. There is no level of compensation which can ever satisfy that, which could ever compensate the families for the real loss. But the notion is, at least from a financial perspective, to do that. What we did here, and there was, I think, an interesting exchange on this, was concerns around the discrepancy between the level of insurance coverage that airlines have for any single incident. So we heard from representatives of the insurers and airlines that essentially airlines pay a premium. Insurers are thereafter obligated to insure them for any legal liability that they may face. But there are concerns that there is a significant difference between what's the level of insurance coverage that airlines have and the level of compensation or damages or by settlement which are being paid out to victims. And the figures were really quite startling, the difference between what an airline carries by way of insurance coverage and what the compensation that was certainly paid in the Spanair case. So there were clearly concerns around that and challenges. There was, I think, an explanation that having any linkage between insurance coverage and compensation could cause constraints within the insurance market, so it could make it challenging for airlines to get the right levels of insurance to continue operating. So those are the sort of, I think, the two concerns that were raised. And I would like to think that, and I'll finish on this, I'd like to think that by working creatively, we may be able to bridge the gap between those two areas of concern, to try and take a fresh look at the issue of immediate assistance, advance payments, and levels of compensation that are governed by the treaty. Now, that will need work to be done within Icao, within the legal committee. As I said myself yesterday, we already have a fairly busy work program, but this is clearly a matter of priority and a matter of urgency that we do need to give consideration to see if there is some way that on an international basis we can come to some consensus around the issue of advance payments and compensation to be paid to victims. Let me just close perhaps these remarks to say that one definite action which I'd like to take forward, and I think there was consensus around this in the room, was the importance of having this kind of discussion. I think it's certainly in my experience the first time that we've had such a free and open exchange between the victims and their families and their representatives, legal representatives, and those representing airlines in the insurance market as well as the airlines themselves. And I think, as I said, I would hope we all learned from each other, from those different perspectives. I think we've got a better sense of what the challenges are from both sides. And so having this kind of forum, this kind of discussion, to my mind, is a very specific action which we can take forward and we should take forward. And as I said, I felt the exchanges that we had on my panel were extremely rich and educational, and I hope will allow us to bring this discussion forward. Thank you, Victor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. Yes, I took note. Things that can be done. There's no question at all about encouraging the ratification of the Montreal Convention. You believe that as you call it, creative work can be done in the legal domain. in order to address the immediate payment and also this different level of coverage and compensation, that this can be taken at the point of time by the legal committee of Icao at the point of time. Of course, the program of the legal committee has to be approved and discussed, so that could be one of the recommendations that we make to the Council of Icao, is to take into consideration this topic in order to include it in the legal committee. And then I see that there is plenty of things to be explored and clarified in a further exchange, focus, and monographically addressing this topic in a forum, in a workshop forum, that could provide more clarity and exchange from both sides, the insurance, the companies, and those affected by accidents. I think that's a good summary. That was an excellent session. Probably this is the first session that we have had in this topic. And we see that there are plenty of work to be done. I'm very happy that the Director of Legal Affairs is proposing all these actions. And of course, we will take this into consideration in the Council of Icao. So thank you very much, Michael. Of course, please exchange points of view if necessary among moderators. This cannot be only a bilateral conversation between myself and you. Then we have Steve Kramer. Steve, I had to do some job for you yesterday, and I was very pleased to do so. But I am sure that you had the opportunity to see the recordings and you saw the discussion. So please give us your input from wherever you are. Steve, please.
Thank you, Victor, and I want to thank you, the Spanish government, and also all of the aircraft accident victims' families associations, specifically also, of course, Ms. Vera Palmas and all of her colleagues for the work that they have done in collaboration with you and your government and with Icao to organize this event, which is actually quite ambitious, and we ran into the technical difficulty because of my absence yesterday. Victor, thank you for stepping in. The group in session 3 was actually very well moderated, and I think there was a lot of good information that was brought out for the symposium. And I was able to watch the video from my location in Doha in Qatar, where unfortunately the timing on the session had been moved in my calendar, and I was prepared to be with you 4 hours after you had the meeting. So because I missed it, I was able to make the review, and I do have some thoughts based upon the points that were raised by the various panelists, and I'd like to share those with you. The panel opened with a discussion outlining the broad scope of work that's necessary to achieve true assistance for accident victims' families. And there's substantial work that is needed to become effective and to gather effective experience in this regard. And that was brought forward by several of the presentations about the experience of the various accident investigation authorities and their constituents. To begin, it's important to remember that all Icao member states should comply with the Icao provisions requiring an independent accident investigation authority and capability. They must do this to set the foundation for the building of public trust in investigation reports. And trust was a theme that ran throughout the session. Trust requires enormous competence in aviation sciences. And this was traditionally the focus of accident investigation authorities from the beginning of their existence in the middle of the last century. In its infancy, accident investigation's best practice employed efforts to confidentially handle sensitive information, including victim statements, voice recordings, and draft reports, to reduce unwarranted speculation. But that was focused on making sure that the findings of an investigation were as correct and pure as possible. It was not done necessarily with a view towards accident victims' families. In recent years, though, this work has expanded beyond the competence, the technical competence, and it now includes new awareness of and skill with communicating the evolving circumstances relating to an aircraft accident investigation. Today, Annex 13 requires this competence. We heard that the National Transportation Safety Board has dedicated a team of specialists to perform the communication and outreach duties on behalf of the NTSB, recognizing the challenge of having all of the expertise of technical capability and that communication and coordinating capability in one authority, one person. Engagement amongst those specialists helps with transparency on the progress of investigation, and that's crucial for meaningful assistance to begin, with effective protocols to prevent surprises, unwanted surprises for the families as an investigation proceeds. Engagement amongst the assistance liaison and communications focal points across the entire stakeholder community, starting with the aircraft operator, the airports, law enforcement, prosecutorial offices, and organizing this liaison activity to ensure the discrete, independent conduct of a safety investigation, and for the Accident Investigation Authority to be in a credible position to lead that coordination is all necessary. In other words, it was pointed out that a unified command and control of information and communications is really the foundation for effective assistance work. Within this emerging science of assistance, communication, and liaison especially, there are several factors that have become more common, that are common to best practice implementation of assistance. The first is protection of the privacy of victims' families. We heard that cultural and religious practices need to be acknowledged, and there has to be competence to address this sensitivity in the correct way. The handling of family inquiries and capacity to assist with marshaling instructions to the accident victims' families, where to obtain official information, how to gain assistance to visit the accident site where it's appropriate, how human remains will be protected, handled, and repatriated, and how personal effects will be handled, and many more that were not specifically addressed that are part of the protocols that have been established. Taking care to address misleading speculation in a timely and effective way, while still preserving the necessary confidentiality. And emphasizing the objective of safety investigations is to improve safety, not assign blame. And then finally, offering openness to victims' families on potential information on how they might engage in safety advocacy work as a result of their experience and the tragedy that they suffer. There are a couple of concrete actions that come from all of this. There's a lot of work that's been done, but the group highlighted a couple of items that I think are noteworthy to consider for the outcome of the symposium. The Icao Accident Investigation Panel has a work group that considered the release of factual investigation information, the methodology, and concluded in its last meeting by proposing amendments to guidance material related to this subject. During previous meetings, there were also consideration of how the media are to be used as the conduit for the release of information. Obviously, social media is both sometimes helpful, but also a concern. And so further development of this material and then training on the product is a clear next step to evolve the release of information, the practice of how it's done for protection of the rights of the accident victims' family. So that's one concrete step. We can continue to evolve. And the second, which is really exciting, is amplifying the messaging and the communication with many of the member states which have less capacity for accident investigation on their own, in their own right because of the scope and size of their government capability. So a resource sharing activity is already underway called the Regional Accident Investigation Organizations Cooperative Platform. And it's doing two things. First, Icao, through the platform, is encouraging the formation of these regional associative or regional organizations so that states can pool their resources. But second, it allows more rapid uptake of these best practice communication liaison capabilities within these smaller governments so that they can share these capabilities and learn from one another through the platform. The panelists noted the potential for additional cooperation like this in the future, and I'd like to suggest that Icao will propose that the Icao RAIO platform for these accident investigation organizations should incorporate these objectives into the platform products that are under development. And this offers the potential for greatly amplified outreach and support amongst the member states, which number almost 100. So to briefly recap all of this, the lead-off speaker, Professor Braithwaite, reminded the symposium of the point of a safety investigation from the perspective of an accident victim family member is to find answers. Why did this happen? Did my loved one suffer? And what will be done to prevent others from experiencing what I am experiencing? To effectively deliver those answers, we must be more than accurate. We must preserve every person's dignity with respect and compassion. And we must earn and keep public trust and the trust of that family member with our collective competence and professionalism in the face of these tragedies and the emotional loss that ensues. So thank you for the opportunity to share these concluding remarks, and thank you also for the attention that you all provided for the presentations by the panel members, and thanks to the panel members themselves for participating. Back to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you for your contribution. Yes, there were a number of principles that we had in the presentations from different speakers. We will capture all that at the end in a report so that they are not missed because they were fundamental. You touch upon very substantial comments of dignity, compassion, but there were systematic principles on how the safety investigation is conducted. Why happened, what happened, yes, indeed. And you have identified two actions and one third that you have to clarify a little bit more for me. First, you said the accident investigation panel, of course, they will work on guidance and material on how to communicate information. Yesterday, we mentioned that information has to be quick, has to be trusted, validated, and issued by a competent authority. I hope that the panel will capture all this into their work. You have touched also the social media. This is a fact. So you said it sometimes is helpful, sometimes it is a challenge. Well, it is a fact. So we have to face that fact. And that's why the information has to be quick, and has to be quick from also from the accident investigation authorities. It doesn't mean that they have to report everything, but they have to communicate quickly so that avoid speculation, not only in the media, but also anxiety in the affected victims and families. And then you have identified an issue that is really important, and this is the collaboration of states on accident investigation when it happens. We know that some states, they don't have that capability, and to have a regional approach, a common approach, it will be very efficient, and it will let's say, avoid situations that we have seen sometimes in the past. We have examples. We know that in Latin America there is an example, and there are some other examples around the world. And Icao is promoting this exercise, by the way. It's promoting the exercise of a regional approach to safety oversight and a regional approach to accident investigation activities as a fundamental piece for the work in the future. You mentioned a platform. Could you please clarify this platform?
Thank you, Victor. So this is a follow-on to an activity that we began about 4 years ago for regional safety oversight organizations. In cooperation with IASA, in that case, we established a platform on the internet which has training resources, best practice resources, communicates the latest information, and we have done the same thing now, just recently kicked off with regional accident investigation organizations, which includes the ones you've just spoken about. And we're really excited because that's an opportunity to more rapidly transfer this information and knowledge to those authorities and help them with assisting each other through the platform with their work.
Okay, thank you very much. Now it is a little bit clear to me. And thank you for your contribution, Steve. I think we can move, and then probably we can exchange points of view. Thank you. And Steve, I hope that you can stay with us some more minutes, just in case.
I will be with you. I will turn the camera off at this point.
Okay, great. Yes, because you're big in this room right now.
Indeed. Thank you. Every point shows. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we can proceed. Next is Pilar Vera. Pilar, you were not a moderator, but you are a special person in this context. You have been helping the organization of this symposium. You were at the beginning of the actions regarding the victims and families and many other initiatives that we have had in the past. So, Pilar, we would like to hear from your side.
Hola.
Good morning. So, what I'm going to say before the proposal I'm going to make, so these are the consequences, these are the results of the persons and the associations that comprise the association. This is coming from the tragic, vital experience that we have lived. We don't want compassion, we want empathy and humanity, because we have been able to go beyond and to assume a responsibility that sometimes was not understood by the governments, by the operators. And we have also taken a step forward. We have also given solutions to the mistakes in the systems that cause air crashes, and we have worked hard to carry out these. Nobody wants air crashes to occur, but sometimes nothing is done to avoid this. So sometimes there are some failures in the system that go unnoticed, especially because of the lack of monitoring and because we are reactive and not proactive. So subsystems tend to make themselves comfortable, and in spite of the predominant dynamism, it seems that we do not need systems to act on first notice, and we don't have to wait until we do this, because that will be late then. And beyond other considerations, the main focus must be the passengers. The pandemic has hit very strongly, and as after any crisis, only those who were best prepared, only the strongest will be able to survive, and only those who kept the synergies that were sufficient to face a crisis will be able to survive. After we are afraid that before this policy to survive, the essential aspects might be neglected in the air transport, and that's why the authorities with the competencies must be alert, and they have to take serious measures in the case that a plane is not able to get the destination. Most of you have come to Gran Canaria by plane. This is as our biggest means of transport between the other islands, between the mainland in Spain and in the other places in the world. The tragedy of the flight JK5022 is in the heart of this city and in this island. We all knew some or any of the passengers in that flight, so it's inevitable to think that we could be affected by what happened on the 20th of August 2008 in Madrid, and we are looking for truth, justice, reparation, and memory. These conclusions come from what we have lived after these years of learning how the aviation works, and the assistance to victims isn't only managing the emergency, but we have to go beyond and solve the problems that arise after an air crash, and for which they are not so much do not receive so much attention as after the first day, and this goes to the dark side that no one wants to approach. You can believe me when I say that it's very difficult to overcome the absence of the loved ones, and in the cases of some families, this is an impossible mission. Many have died without knowing the truth of the justice, but they had the hope to meet the children, their grandchildren, their fathers, mothers, etc. So this is the fruit of the feelings, study, knowledge, experiences. So these are learned lessons coming from our vital experience. So the recommendations that I put forward to the Icao, to the industry. Firstly, we find it very important that the Icao prepares guidelines with a minimum standards on how to treat official information about the air crash. We have been talking about the treatment of the information and the management of information. So we have the official information of the causes of the air crash, and we also have that the families, when we are waiting for the identification of our loved ones, when we want to take them home, we sometimes receive information that are very damaging, and this information. So you should take into account that you are informed about the accidents of the causes, but the relatives, the families, are receiving also information that can be very painful and damaging. So in La Palma, the nature became angry, and we have a volcano that is hitting us very strongly. And the Canary Island television is providing information on three important directions. Firstly, it's explaining to the population suffering the effects of the nature. So the television is explaining why and how and the manner in which the nature and in which nature is working, is acting with infographics and with other means. Secondly, we have the people that have lost everything. When you lose everything, you know where you are located. So you have to give to these people certainty and security. And this can be only done with trustable and trusted information. And then, fortunately, we have no deaths in the volcano, fortunately, but this third party, the television from the Canary Islands, has made available to the victims an office. And so if you want to tell something, go to this office, and then we will listen to you and we will give you the voice on the television. This model of the television of the Canary Islands, and which is broadcasting for free to the whole world, this could be the basis for this guideline on the treatment of information. This is possible. We have been working for this to be possible, and we have an example now. So please take note, the people from the Icao, the industry, the media. This is possible. This is a reality now. Secondly, we also put forward, as Mr. Marquis said, so the Icao should give priority to a legal working group on the best practices with the insurance companies. They are very powerful entities, and this is a big gap, a big abyss between the families and the insurance company. The purpose could be whether we change or not, whether we amend or not the Montreal Convention, but the legislation should be standardized. What you have said about the European Union is not how you mentioned, but in some countries such as Spain, the local law, the Spanish law prevails, and so the victims are assessed based on some criteria prepared for the automotive sector, but not for the victims of air crashes. So it's also very important for other federation that the authorities for the investigation, these authorities, the investigation authorities, should be independent from the legal sector and from the judicial and from the executive powers. So the citizens only believe in the institutions that show that they are committed to giving to the system something more than the mere interpretation of the causes of accidents. What we want to get is to get serious, thorough investigation and independent investigation, because this will help the aviation, and not with a very complex regulation. And in many cases, the people that have to apply do not even know the regulation that they have to apply. Also, we call upon the IATA and the OACi, if the member states of the Icao comply with document 9998, why does the industry does not? So I think that we have to encourage the IATA and the OACi associates through the audits. So if you have a victim assessment plan and you comply with it through drills, so they have to be encouraged, or because this is important. Also, I also ask the Icao, this has been broadcasted by Icao TV, so you have to prepare a document on paper format, and this should be a guide for the next state to become involved and to hold discussion meetings, as Mr. Kramer said before, every 2 or 3 years under the sponsorship of the Icao, and together with the cycles of the assembly. So every year when you have the assembly, so I, as a president of the Victim Association, I will take to the next assembly of the Icao, I will take the conclusions, and I will continue to insist through the working papers about the conclusions of this symposium. I also ask the states, the Icao, and the organizations to support the Federation of Victims, because supporting the Association of Victims is investing in security, giving voice to the victims from loyalty and from collaboration for a more thorough and efficient civil aviation system. All those that have gathered for the first time, we have said some things to each other that up to this date were in the dark side that only belongs to the victims. Also, I also ask the 56 countries that have not ratified the Montreal Convention, please do so. Take some efforts to ratify the Convention of Montreal, because then the convention will be stronger. Also, I ask for the support to the government, from the Canada government's Safer Sky project. The civil aviation cannot continue to travel, to fly above conflict zone. This is the third time in recent history in the civil aviation where we have a plane shot down. We have to make an effort in the supervision, certification, auditing of the preventative system of the civil aviation system, because we have already achieved, after a titanic effort, that the policy 9998 can be included in the training courses. please, you can rely on the Federation, because we know how we can prepare the schemes of the documents from that document and for document 9973 to be included in the teaching system of the trainer courses. I hope that you do not make the mistake of neglecting us in this topic. The Federation is a fact. We have our headquarters in Madrid. I have been working here for 13 years, and my time is coming to an end, and I hope to find someone to replace me in any of the members of the Federation, of the association. And Hans Efraimson found a substitute in myself, and I hope you can be courageous and replace me. I don't know, I have been able to stand the burden, to carry the burden for this period of 13 years. To me, this has a special feeling, because when I said 6 years ago that I wanted to hold this event here, many smiled and thought that we wouldn't be able. But I knew that there was something that would make this possible. We can continue, Pilar. Sometimes the wings, you cannot see the wings, but they exist, they do exist, and they are 154 innocent people that are next to us. This is what we have at the bottom of this topic. Fighting for something. The difference between those who say that nothing would be achieved and those that have worked to achieve and change the system is that we have tried with all our efforts. We have strived to do this, even though sometimes the results are not with you. So that's why I ask you to reflect on this, to think about this. We do not have affiliates providing fees, not the industry or the governments. Sometimes we are not very kind to them. So that's why I invite all the parties involved in this symposium to give the importance and the credibility that is seen by our work in the international organizations. So no one is free from an air crash, from being able to suffer an air crash. As a traveler that I am, I never lost even a case in the most remote places in the planet. I knew a Swahili proverb that says, if you don't cover the holes, you will have to rebuild the walls. The holes of the system will get that the walls will come down. So the death of innocent passenger cannot be permitted. So the errors that cause the air crashes must be corrected, because the consequences may be another air crash disaster. So on behalf of all the victims that have died in this world, civil aviation ask you commitment in their memory and to accept the proposal that we have put forward, because without distinction of race, religion, beliefs, so they are in our hearts forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pilar. I think that the fact that we're here today, we've spent 2.5 days looking at all sorts of questions that we've never looked at before, and that we're opening the doors for the future. I think it's a major achievement, given that this subject, until very recently, was really hidden from view. It's a brand new, and to have the Secretary General of the Icao and all the DGs and the local authorities, the regional authorities, and everything that we can do to transfer all these reflections right across the world to even reaching the Assembly in 2022, I think that that is a really substantial mark of progress, and it's thanks to you. I've taken note of everything that you said, but we're going to include each and every detail in the final report, because I think that everything that you said is pretty much vital. And I'm now going to ask Francisco Moreno to come in, who moderated the panel on information management. He was not only the moderator of the channel, but he also manages the information here in the Canary Islands. And when Pilar was talking about all the information about the volcano, I know that you're really involved in how this information is transmitted from the source of a catastrophe, as we've had for the last months. I'm really moved by Pilar's intervention, and I'd really like to thank for her words about the Canary Islands radio and TV station. And I think that this calling on everybody for empathy, and I think, you know, it's not so much compassion, it's understanding and empathy that we need in these types of circumstances, and to understand that, you know, it could happen to any of us. As I said, there's everybody on this island has been touched directly or indirectly by the tragedy of the 20th of August 2008. I myself, for many months, I spent months taking boarding passes out of my jacket pocket from that Spanair flight. And that day, which was a Wednesday, I was on the, because I used to take that flight very often. And Pilar has said, and we've heard from so many people how difficult it is to manage such a complex system as is air transport, and all the different stakeholders that participate in this activity. And then when we have a catastrophe, well, we have the airline, we have the manufacturers, we have the insurance companies, and many other actors that make management very complex. And what we were talking about in our panel was a stakeholder that we add into this very complex situation, which is the media that are trying to inform of what's happened, but also bearing in mind all the different vested interests, not just from the industry itself, but also amongst the media. And Vicente was saying, who's one of the panelists, that in the Spanair crash, some media were, as it were, obviously on the airline side, and others on the manufacturer's side, when they were trying to work out the specific technical cause or personal error that may have caused that accident. So I think, you know, from the outset, you know, we live in a world that is characterized by a competitive attitude to information, because everybody wants to be able to offer something new. In those circumstances, there's very little official information circulating, and this can very often lead to unnecessary pain, because I remember the airport doors here in the airport of Gran Canaria, when everybody was, trying to get in to discover something about whatever had happened in a complete state of shock. And they could see how that victim was surrounded by a swarm of cameras because, they might have something new to tell. Obviously, from the victim's point of view or the family member's point of view, that was awful. Some of the circumstances some of this also happened in the 19th of September in La Palma, where hundreds of people had to leave their homes, and they're told that they've got 10 or 15 minutes to get whatever they can because they've got to leave very quickly. At that point, we get a TV crew, or several of them, go into the house with those during those 10 or 15 minutes where you don't know whether to take a photo of your late parents or some kind of a souvenir or something that will help you to not lose all that you've lived in that house. And I do think there's a certain similarity here in terms of this invasion of privacy. And, we are a public service, and we know that probably one thing is wanting to know about what's going on. And actually, wanting to make somebody suffer is a different thing altogether. And then we take these decisions. These people had to abandon their house, or they're taken to a football pitch, and where it was where we went through the whole thing of whether they could go and stay with a member of the family, or if they needed to be put up in a hotel. And we were saying, well, if we set up cameras at the entrance to this football pitch, nobody's going to come here because these are ordinary people. It could be you or me, and they have been affected by this unexpected happening. And we really thought that wouldn't add any kind of news value, because and so we decided that not to send cameras there either that day or any of the following days. I have to say that these types of things, there have been situations that are similar to those that happen with air crashes. We can have a sequence that's been taken from a CCTV, for example, that reflect the specific moment when the air crash happens. And given the fact that there's no other audiovisual material available, the media tend to take that image and they turn it into like a permanent loop when you just, and you just keep seeing the crash and the crash and the crash, and, and how it leaves, how it goes off its course and finally crashes and then explodes. And the image of the accident, what may be of interest from a news point of view, but what's not of any interest is that we should be continually talking about the same thing and showing the same image over and over and over and over again. Because in the volcano, we could see how the lava flows were proceeding and which houses were being gobbled up. And then when we see, in some cases, really spectacular images of the lava flow knocking the house over and swallowing it completely, and we don't really need to see that over and over and over and over and over again. And I think these are really interesting lessons here, because we need to... The fact that we avoided repeating these images or even filming them in some cases didn't mean or didn't automatically mean that we, as a radio and TV station, were not covering the explosion of the volcano and the consequences and the situation with the people who are affected directly or indirectly. And we're happy to see that the Canary Island citizens have acknowledged and have said that they have felt that they've been well informed, and that, you know, we haven't rammed it down their throats. I studied journalism. I'm not an expert in volcanoes. So, you know, we need to talk to the experts if we want the expert input. Be it an epidemiologist during the pandemic, specialist in volcanoes because of what's happening in La Palma. And I think that journalism right now has to be aware of how quickly people forget about the facts and then turn into kind of speculation and start producing information that is not based on complete facts. And I think that journalists really need always to, based on those facts that have been compared and contrasted and validated, and then we need to leave the analysis in the hands of the experts. The debate in our panel, we had a few controversies because I heard a few things that didn't really seem very realistic, as saying that, you know, victims' families should be trained in order to be able to deal with the media. And frankly, you know, I don't think that's an issue. If you've just been given this awful news that you've just lost a family member, and then they say, oh, you've got to turn around and be trained in how to deal with the media. You know, your head's not going to be in that place, and I really don't think that's appropriate at all. The responsibility of dealing with this appropriately is firmly in the hands of the journalists and the news associations and agencies. And I think that, you know, if we have victims and families that are getting together and forming an association, you know, I think that how the media treat these people, I think this is the weakest link in the chain. And anything that we can do to reduce the pain caused by public exposure is something that we should really take on board, and that public administration should include this in all their contingency plans to deal with different types of crises and emergencies. So how to talk to, deal with the victims and their families needs to be specified. But what we did see in the panel was the need to set up a minimum code of practice. I know that journalists, you know, we don't like any type of norms that limit what we can and can't do. But, okay, we may not be able to make them legally binding, but we can make them, a moral responsibility of part of our social responsibility as journalists, particularly if we work in state media. I think it's important that we should start to work in this way and set an example, so that there's a clear differentiation between the more sensationalist type of media coverage and a more respectful type of media coverage. And you know, in some cases, we've had journalists that have really got it wrong and have ended up making the suffering even worse. where you get journalists turning up at a place and they're specifically looking for people who are having a really tough time. And we've seen that in La Palma. As Pilar was saying, that, you know, if you're in a situation where, you know, you can have a journalist that switches the camera off, leaves it in the car, turns the microphone off, and actually goes and talks to the person and finds out what has happened, and then asks them, you know, would you like to be filmed? Would you like to be recorded saying this? You know, it's so important to take this approach, because otherwise we completely dehumanize the tragedy. And we shouldn't be just showing, exposing, and showcasing the victim's family's pain as a news item. So there's a balance to be struck here. Because you're turning information into a spectacle and dehumanizing those who are affected by these tragedies are things that we really need to avoid. Well, obviously, depending, you know, on the journalist, you know, they could fall on either side of this dilemma of conduct. And I think that really, if we could have some best practices or some guidance, and I think that in this case, regardless of any type of compliance that actually happens in the future, but if we have we've seen enough examples of these types of tragedies to be able to come up with a code of practice. And this was also backed up in the panel. Thank you, Paco, for this recent information of these more than 2 months now of that this catastrophe in La Palma has lasted. You suggest that a code of practice be drawn up. So who's going to draw it up? That's the nub. How can we bring this into existence? I'm asking this because I'd like to know what responsibility an organization like ourselves can actually take on, and what steps can we take to lead to this end point. I'm not sure if it would actually be a code of practice or a set of guidelines, but there are a number of circumstances that recur every time there's an air crash or an air accident, with the use of images, how to deal with victims and their families, what is relevant from an information point of view, and how the information should be checked and validated, and how science and expert knowledge should be given a larger part, and a kind of speculation. Yeah, I remember in August 2008, there were all sorts of wild ideas being broadcast, you know, in the mouths of people who really didn't have a clue. And I think that, you know, from the experience that I've had in the volcano, I will take on the responsibility of sending through some basic points of what could then be worked on to be recommendations of best practices for the future. So thank you very much for taking that on based on your experience. I think that, you know, if we were to look at the experience, not only here in Spain, but from, you know, right across the world, and we could then, you know, work on it and share it right around the world, that would be a fabulous contribution. Thank you so much. And so now we'll close with Nancy Graham.
Session, and I know that you have some ideas to propose.
Yes, I do. Thank you for that. Somebody asked me at the dinner last night, how do you communicate with Pilar? She speaks Spanish, you speak English. How do you communicate with her? I said, sometimes you don't have to have words. It's been my honor to work with you over these years. I'm continue to be humbled by the passion that you put into reversing and taking the pain that your experience brought you into something that helps others. It's humbling. So thank you for that. In terms of conclusions, we captured some bits of what was already discussed, and I tried to put them in a couple of categories that would make it easier for the Secretariat to capture and take this back to the Council to put it to action. So the first one falls into the category of simplify. So I think what we heard in terms of the families is, I don't want to have an Icao decoder ring. I mean, at this point, Pilar almost speaks Icao. Shouldn't have to have an Icao decoder ring, nor should I have to have a lawyer. No disparity to the lawyers. If I've been a family victim, a family member of a victim, there should be a base that's understood that should be some level of compensation for what will clearly need to be medical issues if you're a survivor, as we heard the other day, or some ability to begin some healing for those that have lost loved ones. Money never replaces that, but you shouldn't have to have an Icao decoder ring, nor should you have to have a lawyer. So I would urge the legal committee and the council to consider the objective is to simplify. So while we talked about the advance payments, and that's awesome, if it happens, maybe think of it more as a base. Is it possible to have an international base provision that's provided for every victim's family member or passenger that's injured, harmed in a great way, as a base that's a given? That would actually help the insurance companies understand what their predicated actuaries would need to be, and it would help establish a firm foundation that shouldn't have to be argumentative or difficult during the most difficult time. So that's the action I would encourage for the legal committee, is simplify. And that does take some creative legal maneuvering. It would also, I think, take the opportunity to bring in people we don't usually talk to, like you did in your panel, where you have a little work group that perhaps comes before the legal committee and does a little bit of work to give a proposal or two to the legal committee, so that there's some work perhaps done in advance of that. I know the resources are limited, but it's an idea. And maybe one of the states might be willing to, host a workshop on that or something prior to the legal committee. So that's one request, is simplify. The second is to Icao, but to Icao and its partners. So I see the aviation system is a system of complicated systems. And what we see in an accident is one or all of those systems have failed. And it's up to us then to put corrective actions in. So in terms of assessing, what I would ask of Icao is to perform an assessment of the provisions from the different annexes. So we speak and annex speak. You shouldn't have to do that. We should look at it from the point of view, in this case, of a passenger. And if we do an analysis of all of the provisions from the different annexes that bear on the family or the passenger in the event of an accident, that would be helpful, helpful or inhibiting, that we could weave a thread through all of those provisions, through our 19 different annexes, and do a short gap analysis on the opportunities for strengthening those provisions or adjusting those provisions from the point of view of a passenger or someone who's been harmed. And out of that relatively short analysis could come some recommendations on how to tie some of those threads together. So Annex 1 does this, Annex 2 does that, Annex 3 does, but looking at it from this point of view, if we just extract those provisions that would have a specific, that would take a couple of days maybe, and then weave those threads through, looking at it from the lens of a family member and how we could do more either in the implementation context or perhaps as necessary in the SARPs, but to do that kind of analysis, looking at it in a horizontal way. The third is to promote. So we heard Icao's leadership and commitment to the families remains vital. And in that context, the family assistance file, if you call it that, because there is no such thing, needs a home, a permanent home in Icao. This is not something that should come and go. It is our duty. And so in that context, it needs a home. And to the Secretary General, I asked yesterday for him to think of a long-term methodology. In the organization, we have an officer to do X or Y. This may not need that. It doesn't necessarily even need a person. It needs a process. It needs a home within the organization. It's a part of our duty. In addition, there are a variety of methods that can be used to keep the momentum going as necessary. Some promotion of the policy and of the documents that are supporting the implementation. Some concerted pressure, and I do mean pressure, on the states to ratify the Montreal Convention. And that can be done in a number of ways that are diplomatic, and you guys can think about that. But in that context, I'm not sure that the states even understand that they become an impediment to something that's related to an accident. So some education and some diplomatic strong-arming could be in order. And that's exactly what the President and the Secretary General can do. And they do it well. Routine, periodic symposia with conjunctive workshops. So it's one thing to have this kind of a discussion, but there should be a conjunctive workshop. Now, I'm going to say something controversial. For high-risk states would be helpful. What's a high-risk state? Icao has information based on the audits and other elements that combined, I know because I put it in place, combined with safety information from the other associations that can determine the risk areas, regions, if you want to go that far, or groupings of states that we know have had a series of incidents or accidents that are trending in a certain direction. We can predict those, not with certainty, of course, but we can predict the areas that have higher risks, that have weaker systems, that need help in developing these plans to work in support of what may be an inevitable accident, or at least readiness and preparedness in anticipation of hoping that never happens. And Icao can consider also a regional office role in promoting, perhaps hosting the workshops for the family assistance, and helping to assess those areas that are risk. Those are risk areas. That doesn't have to be public, and it doesn't have to be an A to a B, but Icao knows how to do that. Cooperation on implementation. Icao needs to continue to get over the fact that it's not all about the states. Working together in partnership with the other associations, and there are many, and challenging them. So Icao has the job to challenge the other associations into partnership. I will tell you that our colleagues from IATA mentioned yesterday that the Center of Excellence, they have an emergency response plan task force that is one of their aspiration goals is to continue to build the relationship with external and non-airline entities, airports, service providers, et cetera, to work together in a cooperative way to do these drills and establish preparedness. So I want to give them credit, IATA, for continuing to reach out. Similarly, I posed a question to ACI yesterday about how they could possibly take an additional step forward like IATA has with the IOSA, which is an audit program, to insist that their members have had that step forward and are IOSA certified. In ACI's case, I appreciate Thomas did this research very quickly, and their governance structure doesn't allow for that. The airdromes are certified by the state, but they have some methodologies that he's begun to think about to take to their board to come back and suggest methodologies that will encourage further collaboration in that regard. So I appreciate him. I don't want to say what that is because they've got to take it to their board, but just to say that he came back very quickly and said, you know, we can't do that, but we could maybe do this. And that, I appreciate him leaning forward. We need to multi-brand documents. The implementation documents, that's not easy to do. It requires a lot of collaboration. It takes a little bit longer, but it means a lot more. When you have 5 logos on an implementation document, you know, an Icao logo, an ACI logo, a Canzo logo, IATA logo, a Family Victims Associations logo, on a document that has a lot more meaning than just a guidance material. And what we know is that the challenges that we face in the system of systems is it requires all of that participation. So somebody has to lead that effort. Usually it's Icao that brings a group together. Just again, where that home, where this lives in Icao, can periodically work on the documents that can be multi-branded in order to facilitate implementation. Just makes it easier. You don't want to have to sew, there's a document for this, a document from that organization, a document for, you don't want to have to sew that together. So if you can do that and multi-brand, it is really powerful. And also putting into place little kits that help the states. I called them iKits at the time. I think they're called iPacks now, but they're little packages of information that gathers everything together. That is one of the things Icao does well and can do. And then finally, transparency. Use the audit programs, and I say programs because it may be more than safety right now. Use the transparency that we have to reinforce the family assistance requirement and make the state's readiness transparent. This is controversial, again, as a part of the Global Aviation Safety Plan, report. Every year, Icao puts out a Global Aviation Safety Report, and in that report is a periodic, how we doing? This could be a segment in that report on the readiness for family assistance. It could be one of the focuses, for example, of 2022, and put a little light, as Pilar says, on the dark side. And put forward those that are best practices. And as Steve mentioned, have a platform that shows where those plans are and those paths are, and do what Apex has done in ACI, buddy up, mentor-mentee relationship between airports or between states that need help but have other ties in other arenas. And then finally, in the other category, more effort needs to be done, more work needs to be done in the conflict zones. This is no knock on what has been done already, but just more preparedness in terms of thinking, as Remy mentioned yesterday, perhaps early warning signs of potential conflicts as we begin to hear them rumble or see them rumble in our political system, and develop a playbook of alternative routes or an alternative mechanism that could be put in place if that happens, so that it happens faster, so that the mechanism happens faster. So just begin to anticipate more. That's a very difficult thing to do. I understand the complexities of that, but everything is difficult to do. So this is something that could be done with future planning. We know where the hot spots are. We know where they're beginning to heat up. So again, that falls into something for the council to discuss, but those were the wrap-up thoughts that we had in terms of next steps. And I thank the panelists. We had a fruitful discussion, and I appreciate them leaning forward and thinking about, well, we can't do this, but we could do this. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Nancy. I took note of 9 actions, I think. Together with the rest, we are in the range of 25 actions, more or less. And of course, that will be fundamental in our report at the end. Although some of your reflections are related with Pilar, with Michael, and also with Paco. So all of them, they are more related, but we have to put it in black and white at the point of time with the right wording. Do we have any question, any suggestion, something that we have missed that you believe that should be included? Some initiative? Yes, I have. Please, can you? And then over there, yeah.
Hola, buenos.
Good morning, everyone. So I introduce myself. This is my unique opportunity for the end of this symposium. I would like to have take advantage of this international symposium with your category. I am Loretta Gonzalez. I'm the daughter of I'm a physician. My father was a pilot. I'm an expert in intensive care, and I'm also a double victim of the Spanier accident. I lost my 23-year-old daughter, and I also was under intensive care unit, 4 in psychiatric treatment, 4 in a wheelchair, and I have undergone surgery for 14 times. I don't want your compassion or cry with me, because I have already cried for almost 14 years. I just want to congratulate Pilar Veras for the work she has done for all of us and for all the victims of our association. And I have to corroborate what you have said and to what almost all of you has said. So this is not a question. This is this is something that I demand of you. Sorry, because I'm getting nervous, but this is a demand, especially to Mr. Victor Aguado, because you are the representative of the government of Spain to this international association. Also Pilar, who's representing, and all of you. Because we want you to learn, because from an international forum of this category that you represent, so you can take action and establish guidelines and regulation. I know that they are very difficult to carry out, because I know that this is a very difficult and bureaucratic procedure. But for those countries with less cultural resources or health resources in Africa, in America, etc., and even ourselves in Europe or in North America, that we can act properly in a situation that you are coming here by plane, and a situation that you can be a victim of this at any moment. So my life came to a stop because the life of my daughter cannot be recovered. But as of this date, almost 14 years later, I have been fighting in the court for financial compensation. This is not as important, because the wheelchair that I was using for 4 years, I have to purchase the wheelchair myself. The health care was given by the healthcare system of this country, where I have been a professional for many years, and it is of great quality. But the psychiatric attention, I paid this for myself. So the mass media, please, you cannot go to a mother or father who has had lost a daughter, a son. You cannot go and take a picture of them. This is a demand for help on behalf of all the victims, on my behalf, and on behalf of all those that are not here any longer. So please do not forget us. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Pedro Conjera. I'm an air controller, and I work in security. And I would like to point out something that I don't think that has been fully reflected, and the situation here with the victims. Nobody in the air sector is going to be able to understand, even if they've lived it firsthand, as is my case, how the victims actually feel, the pain that they feel, not at that time, but that will live with them throughout their life. But the act of generosity is what we actually see here, because based on that pain, they want improvement. We all know that feeding back is not possible. Everything that we can work here in the future is not actually going to mitigate their pain at all. But even so, they're here. I'm been surprised to hear when I've heard about the insurance companies, and they're talking about the minimum necessary right. They either, what they have to do to avoid falling into illegality, but what they need to do is to work on these best practices so that the countries can take them on and can the airlines can. I know it's really difficult to impose this from the Icao, but we do need these best practice guidelines, and I think that's what we need to put this into practice, because we cannot frustrate, what these victims are trying to do, despite their pain. So thank you very much to the victims and the family members for making these steps for future improvements.
Okay, now you do hear me. Good morning. My name is Ariel Chakran. I'm the chairman of the IFALPA Accident Analysis and Prevention Committee. I'm also a pilot for Iberia Airlines of Spain here. If you don't mind, I will change over to Spanish, as it's our mother tongue and we're in Spain.
I'd like to congratulate Pilar Vera as the president of the association and Icao for having organized this symposium, which I think was overdue, but at least, we're able to hold it now in order to be able to recognize the families of victims. I'd like also to thank Mr. Moreno Garcia, because here in Spain we've seen the images over and over again of La Palma, this volcano, and we have all been really grateful for the sensitivity with which the Canary Island radio and TV stations have dealt with this. And we know that images is what sells in today's society. And we as pilots, unfortunately, are very often the focal point of investigations, and we tend to figure in those images, and we've seen over and over again the repeated images right across the broad scope of media, where we see that the pilots are very often blamed. And our families are also victims of these accidents, and nobody really takes this into consideration, where we as pilots, the family members see that they very often lose their loved ones, the pilots. I was one of the speakers in the accident investigation panel, and we have for years been campaigning that not only the images but also the recordings on the flight recordings be protected, because otherwise, our families hear them over and over and over again. And the images that are recorded up on the flight deck are always of maximum interest for the investigation process, and there's a lot of pressure for these recordings to be done. And what we most fear is that these recordings would end up in the media, because unfortunately the investigations are not equally protected in all different countries. And we know that you can just tune into YouTube or on the internet and pick up the audio recordings of flight decks very often. And we want to protect the dignity of the families of the pilots. And we would particularly like the images and these recordings to be covered by any protection and any best practices. Thank you very much, and my heartfelt congratulations for holding this symposium. Yes, anybody else? Questions, comments? Yes, or suggestions?
Okay, please go ahead.
Hello? Thank you. I really appreciate the panel and their conclusions, which I think is really important. The one thing I do want to highlight, and I think we haven't quite covered, is the beginning of when family assistance starts. And I believe that to be at the airports when the Family and Friends Reception Centre opened or the Survivor Reception Centres are open. We know that now airports and air operators are under significant pressure with reduced resources and have to rely heavily on ground handling agents. And they will often be the individuals who are going to help with the Family Friends Reception Centre. But there's little guidance or training given to them in order to support the airport and indeed the air operator if an incident were to happen. And I think this is why we see time and time again sometimes when these are open that they're not as organised and they're not as protective to the families and survivors that they need to be. So I really would love to see some guidance and some best practices and training giving to airports and airlines in the use of ground handling agents to support the mechanism of supporting families. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We will take note of that request. Nancy, please.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's an outsource element of that needs to be captured. But I always like to say, would you be willing to write some? There you go. Okay, so she's from Kenyan Airlines.
Yeah.
And if she's willing to work with the organizations as we put together these workshops, and she's willing to write some best practices based on that outsourcing notion to the ground handlers, there you go. We got to write down your name so we know who to call. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we go to here, down there, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Yes, can you hear me? Thank you, Victor. We've come from the Dominican Republic, from the Civil Aviation Authority, and in my case, as a representative of my country in the Icao Council, to say that you're not alone. We have been observing everything that's going on in this symposium, and we really support the initiatives that are being taken to be able to give a good response to the situation. And I would like to identify with the 9 subjects that Nancy Graham put forward from her long experience in this field. And we are committed to working with the Spanish government to do everything that we can to reach some concrete proposals here. This month, we're celebrating the 67th anniversary of Icao, and I think it's time that this organization really got the message across to the victims and their families that they are not alone. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Carlos.
Thank you very much. Carlos Vera is the representative of the Dominican Republic before the OACi, Icao Council. Yes, Pamela? Can you hear me? So good afternoon. I celebrate this symposium. So I was working on for an investigative authority for 8 years, and also in Argentina in 2 periods. So I know very closely the situation about the investigation of accidents and how we have not listened to, or we haven't listened to what we had to do with regard to the assistance to victims. I fully agree with the conclusion that you have shown here, that you have listed here, and there are many topics that before were under the carpet, but now they are on the table. So I would like to congratulate both the Icao and also the Federation of Victims, because from a personal point of view, as an officer in a state, we should be embarrassed. We should be embarrassed because we are propelled by the victims, and we are the main characters involved in the aviation system, so we should be working ourselves. So the fact that the victims are supporting us to work on this, so about their liabilities and what we have to do, that we have to open our minds, and from the ethics, from empathy to the actual sufferers of victims of an air crash. I will also emphasize the role of the regional organization, because we think that we have a great potential in order to address many of the issues that Pilar and Nancy suggested before, and also a significant part of the panel. We have to work very hard for this regional organization to have a significant role, to perform a significant role, especially in the countries with less resources, and they also depend on the solidarity of the other states. So we have to standardize. This is one of the main tasks that Icao have to carry out, and you have the capacity and you have the strength to promote these standards and to use these international organizations to control, or at least to provide a lot of training and to work with these blocks or lines of actions that have been suggested in this panel. So from myself, I support one and each of the conclusions. I would like to congratulate the Federation of Victims for the work that they are carrying out for many years. Also, I would like to congratulate the government of Spain for holding this event, and also for supporting independent and transparent investigation and professional investigation, because this is one of the main things that we can provide them with, and in order to transform the pain into something positive for future for the future of aviation. So thank you very much for your participation, and I hope that this is only the start of a long way ahead that we have. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Also, I have we have the last Andrew, who is the representative of the United Kingdom in the Icao Council.
Thank you, Victor. And I too would like to express my thanks for this excellent event over the last 2.5 days. I think we've benefited a lot from the experience and the leadership of Madam Pilar Vera, the Federation and the other family representatives that we've heard from. It's clear that aviation as a sector can and should do better, and I look forward to taking this work back to the Icao Council. The two sessions that really stood out to me were Michael's on the legal issues and Francisco on the communication. And I think it's clear that we need to see more dialogue between the various representatives of the families, the insurers, the airlines, and the spokespersons, and I've lost my train of thought. On the media side, of the spokespersons, the family representatives, and others. I look forward to taking this work back to the Icao Council. I'm happy to do what I can to help. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Now I have more requests. We are running a little bit late, but first of all, I had a request here, and then over there, and over there. Please be short. And over there. No, first. Let's be short because we are running out of time at this point of time. Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I also appreciate this symposium. I've gotten a lot of information, but just one or two clarifications. One is on insurance. When you look at the insurance cover on international aviation, you'll find a number of exclusions on certain geographical areas, and which I normally find as a big risk, because some have a clause that says unless the aircraft is flying along Icao designated routes. And you know the nature of aviation, you cannot stick to an Icao route. You can have reasons to deviate. Maybe you're flying radar because of weather. So there's a need to look at those exclusions in the insurance to ensure that when aircrafts are flying in some geographical areas, the passengers on board and third parties are not exposed. That's one area I think we never discussed. Another issue is managing of the media. When the incident of the aircraft is in a different state from the state of the airline. How would you be able to manage the media maybe in the two countries? How do you control what is said where? Because every state has its own regulations on media management. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for those reflections. Do we have a request over there and then over there, and let's try to close it, please. No, over there, at the end.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenos días.
Good morning. I'm Mr. Beltran. I work for the government of the Canary Islands. What I'm going to express is not representing the government of the Canary Islands. This is just on my personal view. And what I wanted to ask you, because there was a comprehensive, a cross-sectional approach in this symposium that we have seen from the journalistic, human, personal, legal point of view, financial point of view, from the insurance companies, from many different points of view. So, but what I wanted to ask you, whether is it possible, based on these conclusions that we have made, because I was very sad when I listened to Mr. Vidal, the survivor, when he was expressing not only in the debate about the amount that he would get from the insurance, but also by the immediacy of the payment or not. That so the payment that he received. Or that he didn't receive financial compensation that may be discussed in courts, and then in the long term they could have a different assessment, this delay. So we would like to know whether we could have a minimum term from the accident takes place until at least we have a basic, indispensable reparation for any person that has to suffer this crash. This is very related to what Nancy Graham said before in one of the relations, so that is very related, and thanks for insisting on this topic, especially regarding the time frames. She didn't mention the time frames, but this could be mentioned there. United.
Hacer una intervención breve.
Thank you. I'll be very short. First of all, this is one thing that I have taken from this seminar is that at least there is an awareness, and we know things that where they stand, and we need to move forward, leave behind certain things and move forward. So I think that's a very, very positive approach that the entire council and the entire the panels here have taken, and I guess that is the right way to do it. However, when we are talking about quite a few more stakeholders in this process, I think we also need to consider the accident investigation boards of individual countries or high-risk countries or wherever they are. So because a certain amount of training, certain amount of pulling them together or pulling them forward would also be needed, because after the accident or crash, the first people concerned on the ground are the aircraft in investigation or investigators. So their competency or their training or their education or their background, I think, needs to be very, very sort of clearly mentioned, or it needs to be improved or enhanced. So I think if Icao can I understand it is out of the gambit of Icao, it is of individual countries, but at the same time, when we are talking about taking along the ground handlers, we're taking about the other stakeholders, and I think AIBs should also be put into that list and pulled through and pulled along with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is clear. We have accident investigators with us responsible of not only a major accident investigator, but also the network of European investigation authorities. But we take, of course, your suggestion on board. This is a little bit related with some suggestions from Steve Kramer at the beginning, and of course that contributes to the overall exercise. We have another one request over there, please.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Charles Enrique Fierwe from Bajul Accord Group. So I just want to say some things what we have learned from here and take it back to the region as well. I understand a lot of things that were raised based on from the law aspect, from the insurance aspect, and from the risk assessment. But permit me to say that most times we understand that aviation connects people, and we are the people that is be connected, and we should look at ourselves as family. Where we know that we are families, then we should watch our back for each other. That goes to the insurance company, to the lawyers that draft the contract for the insurance. Most times they try to exclude some things, even though you have a minimal benchmark for all these institutions. So we need to, if we believe that we are families, if we believe that we are together, working together for the same goal, then things will be better. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for your request. And okay, the last one. Okay, that will be the last one. Please, here in front.
Thank you. I just would like to say some words. I work for Fondazione 8 of October, you know, which is unique in its panorama because it was made next to the association victims, and it is made of professionals that work for the benefit of victims. And I would like to say to Pilar that our Fondazione will do our best. We will do our best as professionals to work next to you, to implement many of the things that were said, especially in promoting family assistance, as we are professionals working next to you. Thank you, Pilar. And,
okay.
And Icao to you, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your engagement. We know 8 October, we knew the origin and the emphasis that you have made in order to contribute to the support of victims and family victims. Thank you very much. I think we have concluded our last session. We have compiled a number of actions to be taken, so our discussion is not finished. It will be progressing in those actions that we will be proposing. As I said, it's close to 2025. We will put it in black and white. That will be in the report that we will issue with all the interventions, conclusions, and recommendations. That will be a report that will be published. It will be public. Then we will have a report to the Icao Council. I will be engaged in informing the Council on this symposium. And of course, what I hope is from the Council, we will have a document going to the Assembly. That doesn't mean that the Federation of Victims and Families couldn't propose further actions in their working papers to the Assembly that will take place in September next year. Thank you very much. We're going to have a coffee break. It will take 15 minutes, and then we will continue with the closure of this symposium. I would like to advise you that there will be a photo of the group just before lunch. So after we close and we go for lunch, there will be a group photo, and the people, they are ready for that. So I hope that you could come here in 15 minutes. Thank you very much.